My name is Emily Sandler. I'm 37 years old, an architect living in Denver, Colorado. On paper, my life looks solid. I own a $350,000 condo I bought with my own savings. I have a growing list of clients who respect my work, and from the outside, it might seem like I have everything under control. But behind that polished image is a truth I don't share with most people. I come from a family that has never respected me unless I served a purpose. My childhood wasn't filled with love or warmth, just expectations, guilt, and manipulation. My mother was the kind of woman who believed daughters should obey, smile, and never speak louder than their husbands. When my father died and she remarried a domineering man, I learned quickly that silence was safer than resistance. I left home at 18, determined to build a life on my own terms. And I did for a while. But the past has a way of creeping back in. Years later, I found myself married to a man who, in many ways, reminded me of my stepfather, controlling, entitled, and always demanding more. When I refused to hand over the condo I had worked years to afford, the one piece of independence, I still had everything boiled over. My husband turned my mother against me. She called for a family meeting, and there, in front of cousins, uncles, and aunts who barely knew me, my mother slapped me across the face for defying them both. That moment should have broken me. But instead, it awakened something I hadn't felt in years: defiance. This is the story of how I stood up, fought back, and finally reclaimed the life that was always mine. They say a mother's voice is the first sound you learn to recognize: warm, safe, instinctual. But for me, my mother's voice was a warning, a call to obedience. Even when I was a child, it never sang lullabies or whispered comfort. It gave commands, demanded perfection, and reminded me, in 100 subtle ways, that I was never quite enough unless I played her version of the good daughter. Growing up in our narrow beige house in suburban Aurora, Illinois, everything had rules. My clothes had to be pressed, my homework done before dinner, my voice quiet and measured. I was allowed opinions only if they matched hers. My father, the only buffer I had, died when I was 9, a heart attack, sudden and merciless. I remember clinging to the front porch railing at his funeral while my mother stood with perfect posture, eyes dry, lips pursed. 3 months later, she remarried. I never had time to grieve. Her new husband, Richard, was a man who believed in discipline above softness, a former drill sergeant, retired early after a knee injury. He ruled our home like a barracks. He spoke in orders, ate in silence, didn't allow music unless it was classical. I remember once humming while brushing my hair, and he knocked on the bathroom door and barked, noise control, like I was a recruit. I became the girl who got perfect grades and never asked for sleepovers. I memorized the art of invisibility, walking quietly, anticipating moods, always answering with, "Yes, ma'am," or, "Of course, sir." My mother said I was respectful, but what she really meant was obedient, controlled. By the time I turned 16, I'd already mapped my escape. I applied for every scholarship I could find, took up a part-time job at a bookstore, and began squirreling away money into a lockbox taped under my dresser drawer. My dream wasn't even extravagant, I just wanted space. A door I could lock. A life that didn't require permission. I got accepted into the School of Architecture at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. When I told my mother, she didn't smile. Instead, she asked, "Why would you waste your time drawing buildings when you could do something useful? Go into finance or business, something real." I left anyway. She didn't come to drop me off. That first year in college was the loneliest and most liberating year of my life. I had no one cheering me on, no family phone calls during midterms, no care packages or words of encouragement, but for the first time, I also had no one hovering over me. I breathed differently, slept without fear, made friends, designed studio projects late into the night, and cried into my pillow when it all felt too hard, but they were my tears. I owned them. Over the years, I stopped talking to my mother altogether. It wasn't out of hate, just fatigue. Conversations with her always left me smaller, like I'd folded myself into some version of who she wanted, even through a phone call. Then came Mark. I met him at a design expo in Boulder when I was 31. He was charming, clean-cut, with a sharp wit and an uncanny ability to make you feel like the most fascinating person in the room. He listened, or at least, he made you believe he did. He said he admired women with ambition, said he loved my independence. Looking back now, I realized that what he really loved was the challenge of controlling someone who seemed untouchable. In the beginning, we worked well. He had a small investment startup, and I was working at an architecture firm downtown. We went to art shows, tried new restaurants, took weekend hikes. I introduced him to my work. He pretended to understand it. When I showed him blueprints of a multifamily project I'd led, he nodded and said, "That's cute. So how much are they paying you to draw those lines?" It sounded like a joke. Until he said it again. In front of colleagues. 6 months into the relationship, I took him home for Christmas. It was the first time I'd been back in nearly a decade. My mother greeted Mark like she'd been waiting for him her whole life. She set the table with real china, made lamb roast. She laughed at everything he said and whispered to me that he was a real man, just like Richard. It should have been a red flag. Instead, I mistook it for warmth, approval, a rare, fleeting chance to be seen. For once, my mother wasn't criticizing my posture or asking when I planned to get a real job. She praised me, but only through him. "You're lucky he picked you," she said. "Most women don't get that." We got married a year later. It was a courthouse wedding, no big event, just a small dinner afterward. Mostly friends. I wasn't interested in giving my mother another opportunity to criticize my choice of dress or venue. But she came anyway, and she brought a monogrammed gift box with our initials. M&E, stitched in gold thread. It looked expensive. I never opened it. In the early days of our marriage, things were calm. Mark worked long hours. I had my hands full managing clients and design deadlines. But cracks began to show quickly. He didn't like me working weekends, said my job was too demanding for a woman. When I stayed late at the firm, he accused me of choosing a career over family, though we didn't even have kids. By our second anniversary, I had my own architecture studio, a 400-square-foot converted space inside a co-working building. I loved it. I even landed a contract redesigning the Denver Community Library wing, my biggest project yet. But Mark wasn't thrilled. He shrugged and said, "Cool. So, how much money does that bring in compared to what I can make in a week?" When he got laid off 6 months later, the energy shifted dramatically. He didn't look for jobs right away, said he was exploring opportunities. Then, suddenly, he had a business idea, a surefire real estate tech app that just needed some seed funding. He suggested we leverage the condo, the one I had worked for 7 years to afford. I still remember his words. "Think of it as a marital investment. What's mine is yours, and what's yours, well, that's ours too." I said no. That was the first real fight. The second came when he called my mother and told her I was being irrational. She called me at 10 p.m. that night, her voice syrupy but sharp. "You're his wife. Emily," she said, "don't you want to help him? That condo is just bricks. Your marriage is what matters." I hung up the phone. But I should have known it wouldn't end there. The following week was a blur of tension. Mark barely spoke to me unless it was about money. He moved around the apartment like a ghost with clenched jaws and heavy footsteps, slamming cabinet doors harder than necessary. I tried to focus on my project deadlines, but every email and sketch felt distant, like my brain was stuck behind fogged glass. Then, one Thursday morning, I received a text from my mother. Family meeting this Sunday. Everyone will be there. It's time to act like a grown-up. No context. No hello. No invitation. Just an expectation, issued like a military order. I stared at the message, blinking. The words didn't surprise me. The tone was familiar, the same she used when I was 12, and she demanded I cancel a school trip because family comes first. What did surprise me was the implication. Everyone will be there. Everyone who was everyone I called her. What is this about? Mom, I asked as soon as she answered. Emily, she said with a slow sigh, we need to talk about your attitude. You're pushing away the man who loves you, and you're being irresponsible with your marriage. That's not how a wife behaves. I nearly laughed, but it came out as a breathless scoff. You're calling a family meeting because I won't give Mark my condo. It's not just a condo, she snapped. It's about your future, about trust, about respect. Your marriage is crumbling because you're being stubborn and selfish. I raised you better than that. I let silence answer for me. And besides, she added, you're making the whole family uncomfortable with your behavior. They're worried about you. Your cousin Alyssa, Uncle Ben, even Aunt Kathy, they all agree you need guidance. Oh, I said coldly. So now we're doing interventions for women who won't hand over property. She ignored that. Sunday, 3 p.m. You'll be there? She hung up. I placed my phone down slowly, trying to breathe through the heat rising in my chest. I hadn't spoken to most of the people she mentioned in years. I doubted they even knew my address. This wasn't a family gathering. This was a tribunal. And I was the accused. Sunday came faster than expected. Mark was unusually cheerful that morning, humming as he poured coffee, acting like the tension of the past few weeks had never happened. He wore a pressed shirt, spritzed cologne, as if he were going to a business meeting. Ready for today, he asked. I didn't respond. I simply grabbed my purse, the keys, and walked out. He followed. The house was a modest 2-story in a suburb just outside Aurora, my mother's post-retirement haven. Neatly trimmed hedges, white porch railings, a wind chime that sang softly in the breeze. It looked peaceful from the outside, but as we stepped inside, the air turned thick, heavy, like it was holding its breath. They were all there. Aunt Kathy, who hadn't spoken to me since I embarrassed the family by not inviting them to my wedding. Uncle Ben, who once told me I smiled too little for a woman. Alyssa, my cousin, with her permanently raised eyebrows and Instagram-perfect life. And, of course, my mother. Standing like a general at the head of the room, everyone greeted Mark first. Oh, you poor thing, Aunt Kathy cooed. We heard about your difficult situation. Must be hard, Uncle Ben said, patting him on the shoulder. Trying to build something while your wife holds all the cards. My jaw clenched. Mark didn't correct them. Of course he didn't. He just offered a modest smile and nodded, letting them paint me as the villain. The living room was arranged like a courtroom. Chairs formed a circle. A tray of cookies sat untouched on the coffee table. No one offered me a seat. I sat anyway, far end, nearest the window. My mother remained standing. Let's begin, she said, as if she were calling a PTA meeting. We're here because Emily has forgotten what it means to be part of a family. She's forgotten what marriage is about. Commitment, sacrifice, support. She looked straight at me, and humility. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, but I forced myself to breathe. Calm, controlled. Mom, I said slowly, this isn't a family meeting. This is an ambush. Murmurs echoed around the room. Don't be dramatic, Alyssa said with a smirk. Mark cleared his throat. I love Emily. I always have. But lately she's been distant and unwilling to support me when I need her most. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for trust, for partnership. He turned to the group. I've poured everything into my business idea. I believe in it. And I thought Emily did too, but she's withholding. She doesn't believe in us anymore. He looked at me. Is that true? I swallowed hard. I believe in building a life. Mark, not giving away everything I've worked for just because you think you deserve it. Gasps. Aunt Kathy shook her head. So ungrateful. She always was selfish. Uncle Ben muttered. My mother stepped forward. That condo exists because we raised you to work hard. Because we supported you. It's time you gave something back. That's when the last thread snapped. You didn't support me, I said, my voice trembling but rising. You controlled me. You shut down every dream I had. You ignored me when I was hurting. You loved Mark more than you ever loved me, because he reminded you of the man you wished I had become. And now you're here, asking me to hand over my independence again. I stood up. You don't want a daughter. You want an asset. My mother's face darkened. How dare you? And then it happened. Her hand came so fast I didn't see it. Just felt it, the sharp sting against my cheek, the crack of contact echoing in the stunned silence. My head jerked to the side. The room froze. No one spoke. No one moved. Even Mark looked stunned, though I couldn't tell if it was guilt or calculation in his eyes. I blinked. My cheek burned. My chest heaved. For a second, I was a little girl again, hearing the sound of my mother's heels on the hallway floor, knowing I had failed her in some invisible way. But I wasn't a little girl, not anymore. I turned back to her, calmly. Thank you, I said. She flinched. Because now I see you for who you really are. I walked toward the door. No one stopped me. They just stared, motionless. And when I stepped outside into the crisp autumn air, I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I stood on the porch, breathing deep, tasting the cold, sharp wind like a knife that cut ties clean. Mark didn't follow. Good. Because from that moment forward, I knew I wasn't theirs anymore. The silence after I walked out of that house didn't feel empty. It felt clean. I drove home alone. Mark didn't text, didn't call. I didn't expect him to. Maybe he was still in that room, spinning new versions of the story. Maybe he was stunned into silence. Either way, I didn't care. I wasn't thinking about him, I was thinking about me. For the first time in years, the condo felt different when I returned. Not just because it was empty, but because it was mine. Every framed sketch on the wall, every plant I'd coaxed back to life, every inch of hardwood floor I'd scrubbed after long work nights. This space wasn't a number. It wasn't a leveraged asset. It was my sanctuary, and they had tried to weaponize it against me. No more. I sat on the couch, breathing in the stillness. And I thought of the slap, not the sting, but what came after. The silence, the gasps, and the looks on their faces. Not one of them had stood up for me. Not one had said stop or this is wrong. They'd watched, as they always had, pretending it was family business. I wasn't going to wait for another slap, verbal, legal, emotional, before I defended myself, so I got to work. The next morning, I called Natalie, my lawyer. She was a former client turned friend, sharp as a razor and allergic to bullshit. I told her everything. The condo, the demand, the family meeting, the slap. Emily, she said after a long pause. I hate that I'm not surprised. I gave a bitter laugh. Welcome to my family. What do you need from me? I want to know if they've touched anything. If Mark or my mother have tried anything behind my back. If there's a paper trail. She was silent for a beat. You think they're that bold? I nodded. Even though she couldn't see me, I know they are. Okay, she said. I'll run a check through the property registry and financial accounts. And Emily freeze everything joint now. Bank accounts, credit cards, access to anything that ties you to Mark. I moved fast. In 1 hour, I had contacted my bank, requested statements, and secured my accounts. Mark and I had separate finances, my insistence. Not his, but there were still a few linked accounts for household expenses. I locked those down. Then Natalie called back. "Are you sitting?" she asked. She took a breath. "Mark tried to file a co-ownership affidavit with the county office 3 weeks ago." What I felt the floor shift beneath me. He claimed he contributed to the down payment on the condo and filed a document asserting shared ownership as marital property. "But he didn't," I said, stunned. "I paid everything. He wasn't even living with me when I bought it. We didn't merge finances until after the purchase." "I know. But Emily, if no one disputes those filings, they can gain legal traction over time, especially in marital property states." I felt sick. She continued. "He listed a fake joint account as evidence of contribution. We'll challenge it, of course, and we have your purchase and banking records. But here's the part that made my jaw drop." She paused. "He wasn't alone." "What do you mean?" Natalie exhaled. "Your mother co-signed as a witness?" "She verified his ownership claim." I closed my eyes, gripping the arm of the couch. "Of course she did." Natalie's voice turned cold. "They were working together. My guess is they planned to pressure you into compliance, and if that failed, use legal filings to force your hand." My hands trembled, not out of fear, but out of fury. They hadn't just gaslit me emotionally, they'd planned this. Weeks before that meeting, while I was drawing up city plans and designing public libraries, my husband and my own mother were plotting to take what I'd built. "I want to fight." I said. "You've got a case," she replied. "We'll counterfile immediately. And Emily, I recommend filing for a protection order on the property. It'll freeze any legal actions from their side while we investigate further." I nodded, swallowing the fire in my chest. "Let's do it." By Friday, we had filed the challenge. Natalie drafted a formal legal rebuttal and began assembling evidence: my condo purchase documents, banking records, tax returns, even old texts from Mark saying, "Your place is beautiful. I still can't believe you did this on your own." I forwarded emails, screenshots, photos. It wasn't hard. Mark had always underestimated me. He'd never bothered to hide the fact that he saw the condo as mine, until he decided it was his. Natalie also uncovered something else. "Did you know your mother had power of attorney over you?" she asked one evening. My stomach dropped. "What she filed it when you were 19 said it was in case of emergency when you moved away for college. You were technically a dependent, so they granted it. It was never revoked." I sat back, stunned. I've lived my entire adult life thinking I was free. I murmured. "She never used it for years," Natalie said gently. "But if she used it to support Mark's filing, we can challenge the abuse of authority." I nodded, numb. "Cancel it. Revoke everything." And just like that, another invisible chain around my life snapped loose. On Sunday, 1 week after the slap, I received a certified letter. It was from Mark. Not an apology, not an explanation, a demand. "Emily, I regret that things have escalated this far. However, as your husband, I am entitled to marital assets under state law. Your continued refusal to cooperate leaves me no choice but to pursue legal remedies. I suggest you reconsider your position. We can resolve this amicably if you're willing to act like a wife." I stared at the words, mouth dry, the arrogance, the entitlement, the veiled threat. I folded the letter neatly, placed it into an envelope, and wrote, in black ink across the front, "Return to sender, wrong address," because I wasn't his wife anymore. Not in the way he meant it. That night, I sat on my balcony with a mug of tea, staring at the Denver skyline. The city buzzed quietly, lights flickering like breathing constellations. Below me, life moved on. Cars passed, dogs barked, people laughed. I was in the middle of a war, one I hadn't started, but one I would finish. And yet, for the first time, I didn't feel alone, because I had me. And for the first time in a long, long while, that was enough. By Monday morning, the slap had traveled beyond four walls. I wasn't the one who made it public. Alyssa did. My cousin, always hungry for digital attention, had recorded the last 10 minutes of the family meeting on her phone, including the exact moment my mother's palm collided with my cheek. She uploaded it to her private Instagram story with the caption, "You didn't hear this from me. Family drama goes nuclear, pray for peace," but the video didn't stay private for long. Screenshots, shares, reposts. By the afternoon, one of my former interns at the studio sent me the clip. "Is this you? Please tell me it's fake." It wasn't fake. It was a clear shot, me standing tall, my voice rising, my mother's hand flying across the air, and the crack that silenced everyone. The camera shook slightly, gasps, a frozen room, and then me turning, quietly saying thank you. I watched it twice. Then I closed my laptop and let my head fall into my hands. It wasn't just embarrassing. It wasn't just a family scandal, it was a reputation risk. My clients, my team, my future collaborators, they could all see me through the distorted lens of angry woman in meltdown. And that was what Mark was counting on. Sure enough, that afternoon, I received an email from his lawyer, a formal notice requesting mediation for division of marital assets. They included the clip as evidence, twisting it into a narrative of emotional instability and volatile home dynamics. I forwarded the email to Natalie. Her reply came 1 minute later. "Let them try. That slap just made our case bulletproof." Natalie moved fast. We filed a formal property protection injunction, backed with financial records, witness statements, and a signed letter from my condo's real estate broker confirming Mark had no involvement in the purchase. We also filed a motion to revoke my mother's ancient power of attorney and included a complaint for fraudulent use. But the most powerful part wasn't legal. It was visible. The video had done more than embarrass me. It had exposed them. Friends of mine who hadn't spoken in years reached out, shocked and furious on my behalf. One former professor called and said, "Emily, I always knew you were strong, but I didn't know you were this unshakable." I wasn't unshakable. I was done being shaken. Meanwhile, Mark tried to twist the narrative. He posted a long-winded statement on LinkedIn, disguised as a business update but clearly aimed at mutual connections. Navigating challenges in both professional and personal life requires grace. I've learned that silence is sometimes mistaken for guilt, and that partnerships must be rooted in trust. I remained focused on building, not tearing down. The comments were full of vague support. "Stay strong, man. You're doing the right thing." We all go through tough stuff. I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because truth was a slow fuse, but it always burned. That Friday, I was scheduled to speak at a design symposium hosted by the Colorado Women in Architecture Association. I almost canceled. The weight of everything: lawsuits, betrayal. The slap made me want to crawl under the covers and disappear. But Natalie called that morning. "You go," she said. "You stand tall. You don't let a slap or a coward write your narrative." So I put on my favorite navy blazer, pulled my hair back, and stepped into that auditorium like it was a battlefield. The theme was Space as Identity, how design reflects who we are. When it was my turn, I walked to the podium, took a breath, and tossed my script aside. I was going to talk about modular living solutions. I said, my voice steady, but something happened recently that reminded me that space isn't just about design. It's about boundaries. The room went quiet. I continued. I grew up in a home where space wasn't mine, where my thoughts, my choices, even my silence belonged to someone else. Years later, I bought my first home, a condo I built, designed, and paid for with my own hands. And someone tried to take that away, not with a wrecking ball, but with entitlement. I paused. Boundaries matter, not just in architecture, but in life. Because every wall we build, every room we protect tells the world who we are and what we won't tolerate. I stepped back. The applause was thunderous. Not because I was eloquent, but because I was honest. That night, as I walked back to my car, I saw a figure waiting by the driver's side. Mark. He looked thinner, eyes hollow, like someone who hadn't slept. He raised a hand, unsure. "Emily, can we talk?" "No," I said simply. He exhaled, stepping closer. "Look, I didn't know Alyssa was recording. I didn't want this to become a spectacle, but you wanted leverage," I said, locking eyes with him. He flinched. "I made mistakes." "But your mom, she said it was the only way to make you listen." "My mother doesn't speak for me," I snapped, "and neither do you." He looked down at the pavement. "I'm losing everything. Investors are backing out. My startup's being investigated for misreporting revenue. And now you're coming after me legally." I tilted my head. "You used me, lied to the courts, had my own mother sign fake documents, and you're surprised there are consequences." He stepped forward again. "Please, Emily, can't we fix this quietly for a moment?" I saw the man I thought I married, the charm, the softness in his eyes, but it was just a mask slipping under pressure. And I wasn't the same woman he once manipulated. I shook my head. "This is me being quiet. Trust me, if I shouted, the world would hear what you really are." I got into the car and drove off. And just like that, another chapter closed. The next morning, Natalie called. "They're panicking," she said with amusement. "Mark's lawyer withdrew representation. Your mother's being served next week for fraud. And we've been contacted by a journalist, a woman writing an article on financial abuse within marriages." I paused. "Did you give them my name?" "No, but they already knew. The video's viral now, not in a bad way. It's part of a bigger conversation. A lot of women are speaking out." I stared out the window, watching morning light stretch across the skyline. "They can tell my story," I said softly. "If it helps someone else escape before they get hit figuratively or literally, then let them." Natalie hesitated. "You sure?" "Yes. Because for once, I wasn't hiding behind shame. I was standing in front of it, torch in hand." The subpoena arrived at my mother's house on a Tuesday afternoon. Natalie had it delivered by a professional courier, not to punish, but to ensure it couldn't be ignored. It was addressed formally Marjorie Ann Holloway, and it demanded her presence in court for fraudulent declaration of financial involvement and abuse of legal authority via power of attorney. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I didn't answer, but the voicemail came through seconds later. "Emily, this is your mother. What are you doing? You want to shame me, humiliate your own blood. You think the world cares about your sob story. I gave you life. I raised you, and this is how you repay me. You don't win by dragging your family through the mud. You win by protecting it." I didn't delete the message. I saved it because it was no longer just guilt. It was evidence. The week that followed became a whirlwind of depositions, legal filings, and unexpected public responses. My story, now loosely associated with a growing thread on financial abuse in marriage across social media, was being referenced everywhere, especially the slap. A still from the video became a symbol, a screenshot of my face, turned slightly after impact, eyes clear, voice steady as I said, "Thank you." People used it in threads about breaking cycles. It became a meme, a protest poster, a canvas for women reclaiming power. One tweet said, "When your mother hits you in front of everyone, but you've already broken free." At first, I didn't know how to feel. It was my pain, now repurposed, reframed, reshared. But after reading the hundreds of replies, women telling their own stories, how the clip gave them courage to leave, to speak, to fight. I understood this wasn't just mine anymore. I had cracked something open, and the light pouring in wasn't just for me. Meanwhile, Natalie's team built the case like architects precise, unshakable. They found the falsified co-ownership affidavit Mark submitted with my mother's signature as witness. They found the digital trail of Mark Googling how to force spousal property sale and using POA against family. They even found an email between him and my mother with the subject line, "Emily won't know until it's too late." That subject line alone became our cornerstone. But Natalie didn't want to just win the case. She wanted to set a precedent. "This isn't just about your condo," she told me in her office, leafing through folders with tabs labeled witness, timeline, and intent. "This is about dismantling the power structures that people like your mother and your husband use guilt, shame, manipulation to legally trap women." I looked at her. "You really think it can go that far?" She nodded. "If the judge sees what we see." "Yes, we're not just arguing ownership, we're arguing freedom." The court date was set, October 14th, 3 weeks away. Until then, I kept working quietly as the rest of my life changed around me. Mark moved out of the condo. Per a temporary court order, I wasn't there when he packed. I didn't want to be. I just came home one night to find his side of the closet empty, his coffee mug gone, his cologne no longer lingering in the bathroom cabinet. He left a note on the kitchen island. "You'll regret this when the buzz fades and you're alone with your silence again." But he was wrong. Silence no longer scared me. I was learning that peace and loneliness are not the same thing. 2 days later, I received a letter handwritten, carefully folded in my mailbox. No return address. But I recognized the handwriting instantly. My mother. "Emily, I don't understand you anymore. You used to be quiet, thoughtful. You used to care what people thought of this family. Now you want to destroy it. I only wanted the best for you. I only wanted to protect you, if that meant guiding your marriage well. Sometimes mothers know better than daughters. And yes, I supported Mark, because I thought he could anchor you. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe you're not the daughter I thought I raised." There was no apology, only justification. A final paragraph read, "You'll never find happiness living in defiance. Someday, you'll remember that I tried to save you from yourself." I folded the letter, tucked it into a drawer with the court files, not because I needed to reread it, but because it reminded me what I was fighting for. The right to define myself without their help. That weekend, I gave an interview. It was an op-ed podcast run by a local journalist named Tasha, who had reached out with empathy and precision. She didn't want scandal. She wanted systems, how these stories reflected something deeper. We met in a quiet recording room downtown. She asked Emily, "What do you want people to take away from this?" I paused before answering. "I want people to understand that family isn't an excuse for harm," I said, "that silence isn't virtue. And that abuse doesn't always come with bruises. Sometimes it comes dressed as tradition, as protection, as doing what's best." She nodded, gently. "And what does healing look like?" I smiled, slowly. "It looks like reclaiming the keys to your own home. It looks like sleeping without checking if the door is double locked. It looks like not flinching when your phone rings. It looks like being okay with your own voice taking up space in a room." The episode aired on Monday. By Wednesday, my studio inbox was full not of design requests, but of letters from women, girls, and even a few men, thanking me, telling me they left a partner, told their parents no for the first time, reached out to a therapist, started filing their own paperwork. I cried reading them, not out of pain but out of release, because if my pain had given others permission to fight for joy, maybe it was worth something. On the last night before the court date, I stood alone in my condo, lights dim, music low. I opened my sketchbook and drew something I hadn't allowed myself to imagine before: a small home. Wooden, sun-soaked, surrounded by trees, with a garden on the side and large windows facing a mountain view. Not for show, not for status, just a place where I could breathe. And beneath it, I wrote in pencil, "Not everything I build needs permission." October 14th arrived colder than expected. A sharp wind danced down the courthouse steps as I walked up, briefcase in hand, blazer pulled tightly around me. I had slept only 3 hours the night before, rehearsing testimony, revisiting documents, preparing myself emotionally for what I already knew would be the most difficult part, not just facing Mark, but facing my mother. Natalie met me just outside the security checkpoint. She wore her signature gray suit, heels clicking with controlled authority. Her eyes scanned me quickly, professionally. "You're solid," she said, "composed, smart. Let's finish this." I nodded, my chest tight. "Let's..." Inside the courtroom, the air felt like a pressure chamber. Pale wood panels, polished benches, a judge with reading glasses and a face carved from stone. On the left, Mark and his new legal counsel, a man who looked like he specialized in divorce cases involving private jets and yacht custody. On the right, me and Natalie, armed with truth. And behind Mark sat my mother, hair curled, pearls at her neck, dressed like she was attending Sunday service. She didn't meet my eyes. She didn't even blink when I walked past her row. Good, because I wasn't here for her gaze. I was here for mine. The hearing began with formalities: property declarations, financial records, and a timeline of the marriage. Then came Mark's turn. He spoke first. In that same velvety voice he used to charm clients and manipulate relatives, he addressed the court as a wounded husband. He claimed the condo had become our shared residence, that he had invested emotional capital and contributed household improvements, and that I was emotionally unstable, distant, and prone to lashing out. He even cited the viral video, the slap, as evidence of my volatile family background, suggesting it made me paranoid, combative, and incapable of healthy partnership. I almost laughed. Almost. But I didn't. Natalie stood, her tone crisp, her poise unflinching. "We'd like to enter into evidence a copy of the property deed signed solely by Emily Sandler, a full record of down payments from a personal bank account with no spousal access, and an email chain wherein Mr. Sandler refers to the condo as, quote, 'your place, not mine. But I love the view.'" The judge raised an eyebrow. Mark's attorney squirmed. Then Natalie handed over a printout and email subject line: "Emily won't know until it's too late." "Your Honor," she said calmly, "we also have a timeline of legal maneuvering done behind Ms. Sandler's back, including a fraudulent co-ownership affidavit and a misused power of attorney, which was activated by Ms. Sandler's mother, Ms. Marjorie Holloway." The judge turned to my mother. "Ms. Holloway, is that true?" She stood slowly, hands folded in front of her. "I only wanted to protect my daughter's future," she said. "She's always been too emotional to understand the consequences of her choices." "Did you sign a document affirming her husband's right to her property?" A pause. Then yes. No apology, no remorse, just conviction. The judge nodded. "Then we'll proceed to testimony." I walked to the stand, swore myself in, sat down. The microphone amplified every breath. Natalie approached, her voice gentle. "Emily," she said, "can you tell the court what this property means to you?" I looked up, hands folded tightly in my lap. "I bought that condo 7 years ago," I said. "It was the first thing I ever owned that no one could take from me. I paid for it with savings from a job I worked late nights and weekends to keep. I didn't inherit it. I wasn't gifted it. I earned it. And did Mr. Sandler contribute financially to the purchase? No," I said, "not 1 cent. And did your mother co-sign any document giving him partial ownership? No. She only stepped in after I refused to transfer the property to Mark." I swallowed hard. "She did it to pressure me. She knew the condo was everything to me. Natalie nodded. And how did you feel when you discovered what they'd done? My voice caught. For a moment, I considered shutting down emotionally, keeping it clean and composed. But then I remembered Tasha's podcast, the letters I'd received, the women watching. I felt like I was 13 again, I said, like I'd disappointed someone for daring to want something of my own, like I had to choose between being loved and being free. The judge leaned forward slightly. I continued. But this time, I chose freedom. Then came the cross-examination. Mark's lawyer stood slick, expensive, smirking. Ms. Sandler, you claim to be independent, but isn't it true you allowed your husband to live in the condo rent-free? I invited my husband to live in our marital home. I said, that's not the same as ownership. And did you discuss any financial partnerships during that time? Not formally. He walked a few steps. So it was implied, wasn't it, that you'd support him while he built his startup? No, I said. It was assumed by him, never agreed by me. The lawyer smiled, circling back. And what about your emotional state? Would you say you're prone to... Dramatics. Natalie stood. Objection. Relevance sustained, the judge said immediately. The lawyer backed off, but not before glancing at my mother, who was now watching me with something I couldn't name. Not regret. Not remorse. Just discomfort. The expression of a woman who'd lost control of a script she thought she'd written. The judge called for a recess. Outside. I sat on a bench in the hallway, staring at the floor. Natalie sat beside me in silence, letting the weight of the day settle. Then the door opened. My mother stepped out. She walked toward me. Natalie tensed, ready to intervene. It's okay, I whispered. My mother stopped in front of me, hands clasped tightly. Her eyes were tired-lined, red-rimmed. I didn't think you'd go through with it, she said quietly. I looked up. That's the problem. You never thought I would stand up to you. She hesitated. You made this public. You turned everyone against us. No, I replied, rising to my feet. You did that when you signed my name away like it was a grocery list. She flinched. Why, I asked, my voice shaking. Why did you do it? Her silence stretched. Then, softly, because I was scared. Scared you'd drift away for good. Scared you'd forget the people who raised you. Scared you'd realize you didn't need us anymore. I didn't need you, I said, and instead of being proud, you punished me for it. We stood there. Years of silence pressed between us like a third person. She reached out hand halfway to my arm, then stopped. You look like your father when you're angry, she said, before walking away. That was the closest thing to an apology I ever got, and it wasn't enough. Back in court, the judge gave his ruling. The court finds no legal basis for Mr. Sandler's claim of ownership over the property. Furthermore, the court acknowledges an attempt to manipulate the legal system via fraudulent documentation with the assistance of Ms. Holloway. He turned to Mark. All rights to the property are denied. Any further interference will result in criminal investigation. Then, to my mother, the abuse of power of attorney is being referred to a separate civil inquiry. This court recommends no further involvement in Ms. Sandler's financial matters. And finally, to me, you're free to go. Ms. Sandler, fully and legally. I walked out into the cold sunlight. Natalie exhaled deeply beside me. That was as clean a win as it gets. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. And closure is quieter. I looked up at the sky gray. Still. Open. For the first time. I saw it not as something looming over me, but something I could walk into. Free. That evening, I returned to my condo. No longer a battleground, just home. I opened the balcony door, stepped outside, and let the wind rush past my face. In my sketchbook, I drew again the same home from before. Small, light-filled, a porch swing, a garden. This time, I added the woman standing at the door. She was smiling, and beneath the drawing, I wrote she didn't win everything. But she kept what mattered. Herself. It was strange how quickly the noise faded after court. No more emails from Mark's attorney. No more texts from my mother. No more anonymous calls or Instagram messages wrapped in fake concern. Just quiet. But not the kind of silence that once scared me, the hollow, echoing kind. The silence was different. It felt earned. I returned to my studio the following Monday, alone but not lonely. The autumn sun poured through the high windows, casting golden streaks across my work table. Dust floated like tiny stars. I hadn't been here in weeks. Not really. I had stopped sketching, stopped building, stopped dreaming. But now, my hands itched for blueprints again. So I started with something small. A sketch for a single-room healing center, neutral light, curved walls, indoor plants, and a quiet reading space. It wasn't for a client, it wasn't even part of a paid project. It was for me. Word of the court case had traveled not in tabloids, not in headlines, but in the invisible channels women use when they need to know where to go, who to trust, how to fight. My inbox filled again, but this time it wasn't sympathy or praise. It was requests. One message read, "Hi, Emily. I listened to your podcast episode last month. I'm in the middle of something similar. My parents co-signed a loan under my name while I was overseas. I feel trapped. Do you know a good attorney in New Mexico? Thank you for showing me it's okay to say no. Karen, another, you don't know me, but you saved me. I didn't even realize what was happening to me until I heard your story. My husband calls it marital responsibility, but I see it now. I'm filing for divorce next week. Thank you." These weren't just messages. They were signals. Proof that the fight had never been just mine. So I decided to answer them not just with words, but with space. 3 months after the court ruling, I opened a workshop inside my studio. I called it the Quiet Room. It wasn't a design course. It wasn't therapy. It was a safe space for women, mostly young, mostly overlooked, to come and learn how to build something of their own. Some brought sketchbooks, others brought questions. How do I separate my finances from my husband's? How do I talk to a lawyer when my family says it's betrayal? How do I know I'm not overreacting? I didn't have all the answers, but I had experience. And sometimes that was enough. We met every Saturday. The group grew from 5 to 15 to 30. Women of all backgrounds. One had fled a cult. Another was a startup founder whose parents still held legal control over her accounts. A third had never been hit, never been screamed at, but had spent 10 years apologizing for taking up space in her own marriage. Each of them carried stories like mine. Each of them had been told, "In some form you owe us," and each of them came to realize you don't. One evening after class, a young woman named Rena stayed behind. She was barely 20, studying engineering, soft-spoken with deep-set eyes and a notebook always clutched to her chest. "I wanted to ask you something," she said. "Of course." She hesitated. "Do you think forgiveness is necessary for healing?" I blinked. No one had asked me that before, at least. Not directly. I don't know. I said honestly. Some people need it. Some people don't. She nodded. My mom didn't hit me. She didn't steal from me. But she always made me feel like I was a mistake. And now I feel guilty for cutting her off. I looked at her for a long moment. "Guilt doesn't always mean you did something wrong," I said. "Sometimes it just means you're finally doing something different." She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Thank you." Outside the studio. Life moved forward, but it moved on my terms. I changed the locks on the condo, got a new couch, took down the framed photo of me and Mark from our wedding, the one I had pretended to love because it made him look good. I replaced it with a framed quote, "You don't owe anyone the version of you that makes them most comfortable." I began to travel again. Small trips not to escape, but to explore. I visited Oregon's coastlines and stayed in tiny cabins with wildflowers growing beside the porch. I breathed in cold air that hadn't passed through anyone else's expectations. One morning, I stood at the edge of a cliff trail, watching the tide crash against rocks below. And I realized something. I didn't want revenge. I wanted resonance. Back in Denver, I received a letter in the mail. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize at first. When I opened it, I realized it was regarding my mother. Apparently, she was being sued by a former neighbor, someone she had advised on financial documents that later turned out to be incorrect. It seemed she had a pattern. There was a small note attached to the file. Miss Sandler, we understand you previously contested legal action involving Marjorie Holloway. If you would like to contribute a statement regarding prior misconduct, please contact our office. I stared at the note for a long time. And then, I shredded it. Not because she deserved my silence, but because I no longer owed her a single word. That night, I opened my sketchbook again, but this time, I didn't draw buildings. I didn't draw houses. I drew a woman standing alone on a beach cliff, wind blowing through her hair, arms outstretched, no anchors, no fences, no ropes tied around her wrists, just a single word beneath the drawing, free. And this time, I knew. It wasn't just a drawing. It was me. A year later, I stood on the front porch of a cabin overlooking the Oregon coast, the same one I had sketched months ago in my notebook. Except this one was real. White cedar siding, a swing that creaked gently in the breeze, seagrass brushing the stairs. No luxury, no frills. But everything I had wanted silence without fear, stillness without tension, space without permission. I had driven out the day before, just me in a suitcase, taking the long, winding road from Denver to Newport. 7 states, 2 tanks of gas, and 3 stops in sleepy towns that smelled like pine and cinnamon. It wasn't a retreat. It wasn't a getaway. It was a marker. A full year since the courtroom. A full year since my mother's slap. A full year since I stood up, walked out, and refused to return to the life they wrote for me. And I hadn't looked back since. People ask me sometimes if I ever reconciled with my mother. If Mark ever tried to come back. If I miss my family. The short answer, no. The long answer, I made peace without reconciliation. I made peace by telling the truth even when no one wanted to hear it. Mark didn't come back. Not really. He emailed me once, several months after the case closed. A long, self-pitying letter about starting over, losing investors, how you ruined me to save yourself. I never responded. He didn't deserve the version of me he'd created in his head, someone quiet, soft, easy to overpower. That woman was gone. As for my mother, she never reached out again. I'd heard through a friend that she'd moved to Florida, was living with a cousin, and had taken up gardening. Good. Let the weeds grow where they belong. I thought I'd feel empty without her, but all I felt was untethered, and that, I learned, is not the same as being alone. One afternoon, sitting in that cabin, I took out the notebook, the one that had traveled with me from courtrooms to cafes, from Denver to coastal cliffs. I flipped through its pages, designs, quotes, pressed flowers, little sketches of women standing tall, fists unclenched. And then I came to the final page, still blank. I stared at it for a while, pen in hand. What do you write when the fire's gone out, but the warmth remains? What do you say when you've stopped running from your past, but don't want it to follow you into your future? I began, slowly. They told me I was too proud, too distant, too disobedient, that family mattered more than freedom, that a woman who didn't give everything was a woman no one would want, that silence was strength and endurance was love. I paused. then kept going. But I found another version of truth. I found that sometimes saying no is the loudest yes you'll ever speak. That walking away isn't failure, it's flight. That healing doesn't always mean reunion. And that peace. Peace is knowing you didn't need their permission to become someone whole. Back in Denver, life resumed, but never in the same shape. I redesigned my studio space to include a reading lounge not just for clients, but for women who wanted to breathe between court dates, custody battles, or even just hard mornings. No sign out front. Just an open door and a room where no one asked, "Why didn't you leave sooner?" I partnered with Natalie on a free clinic once a month helping women learn about property rights, financial boundaries, prenups, co-ownership pitfalls. We called it Own Your Name. It was simple, but powerful, because that was where so many of us had first been erased in the fine print, in the shared account, in the just sign here, in the assumption that what's yours is his. In December, a woman named Claire came in after one of the clinics, late 40s, smart, weary. She had been paying the mortgage for a house in her husband's name for 12 years. No contract, no deed, no acknowledgement. He said I didn't need to worry. She told me, eyes red, that we were a team, that it didn't matter whose name was on it. I handed her a legal intake form. "It matters," I said gently, "and you deserve to have your name on more than the bills." She smiled through her tears. "I heard your story. I watched the video." The slap. I tensed, just slightly. It still startled me how far that moment had traveled. "I didn't feel sorry for you," she added quickly. "I felt seen." I nodded. That's all I ever wanted it to do. I never planned to be a symbol, I never asked to be anyone's inspiration. But that's the thing about surviving something like this, you don't walk out clean. You walk out carrying a torch. And sometimes the only choice you get is whether to hide it or hold it up for someone else to see. So I chose to hold it. Not for attention, but so the next woman would know, you're not crazy, you're not difficult, and you're not alone. One night, as I was leaving the studio, I found an envelope taped to the door. No return address, just one line on the outside, for when the silence feels loud again. Inside was a postcard with a photo of a mountain cabin. On the back, in neat handwriting, "Thank you. Because of you. I left. I bought this. It's mine. I smiled, folded the card, tucked it inside my notebook next to the page I'd written at the cabin. Because maybe healing isn't a finish line. Maybe it's a mosaic, broken pieces reassembled into something stronger, sharper, unapologetically whole. And me, I'm still building. Still designing houses? Yes. But also designing boundaries, rituals, quiet, space. I host potlucks in my condo now, the same one they tried to steal and fill it with laughter. Friends. And stories that don't end in silence. I water the plants I once forgot. I sleep without checking my phone. I trust myself more than I trust peace because I know peace can be faked, but instinct rarely lies. And sometimes I still think of the version of myself who stood in that living room surrounded, blamed, slapped, and I want to go back and whisper to her, "Don't flinch. You're about to become everything they were afraid of." Because in the end, they tried to take my name, my home, my voice, but I kept them. All of them. And now I live like I never needed their permission in the first place.